Welcome to session 17. This is part A. Okay, we're still on chapter 11 in the book. So, what I'm going to do is talk about two quick topics that are at the end of chapter 11, which key thing I'm going to talk about some aspects of government failure, and especially something called the special problem of concentrated benefits and dispersed costs. And then I'm going to do the prisoner's dilemma. Then I think what will be parts B and C, I will talk about some problems from the back of the chapter. Okay, first thing, let me talk about more on government failures. Okay, so we begin session 16 where I talked about special case why we might want to have subsidies for schooling. Okay, so if you remember this graph, I'm not sure if I drew it exactly the way I did before, but we had to say the demand and supply for education, and the idea, as I explained, you could it can be argued, and I think it's true that there's a positive externality for education, and therefore, if we look at the total benefits of education. Well, let's back up. So, if in this case, when I've drawn the demand curve, those are the benefits of education that just accrue to the person individually. Okay, they don't include the things like making you a better citizen, make you better at following road signs and driving better and not causing traffic problems. Those things which help other people. Uh, the positive externality aspects of education. So when we include those aspects, the total benefits look something like the dotted line, like this. Okay. And so as I explained, under the market equilibrium, you look where the demand and supply curve cross. You say that will be when we just have a free market system, what will be the quantity of bought and sold of education? Q, I'm going to call superscript M. But if you looked at all the benefits, you counted for the positive externality. You'd say the efficient quantity is a little bit higher. You'd want more education than a free market would give you. And so I'm going to call Q sub E, the efficient amount of education. E for efficient. Now, as I discussed, one way to solve this problem is to give a subsidy for education. And if you were a benevolent dictator, what you would like to do is pick the subsidy. I didn't draw it on here, but you'd want the subsidy so that the the supply curve after the subsidy, the marginal cost curve after taking account of the subsidy, would be a little lower, and it would be just at the point where it would cross the demand curve, just so you'd get the efficient quantity of education. But I said it might be that when government, the government bureaucrats or legislators or benevolent dictator do not know the proper subsidy. They don't know the exact amount that will work. And if you have a subsidy that's too big, something like the green brace here, this amount, you'll get too much education, quantity will be too high, or if the subsidy is too low, you'll get quantity Q double prime, and the quantity, the actual quantity will be less than the efficient amount. Okay. When I did that example, by the way, you don't need to have to completely understand this graph. The key is just understand the key point that a subsidy helps solve the problem of a positive externality. Okay. But you got to get the subsidy right. It could be too high or too low, and could be to get you away from that efficient quantity. Okay, that's the main point I wanted you to get. Now, the next point I want you to understand is when I did that example, you think, why was the subsidy too high or too low? Well, the way I was thinking there just could be that the government bureaucrat made a mistake, didn't know the proper amount of subsidy that should be given, and could misestimate that, make it too high or too low. Okay, so that could cause a government failure. Just the idea that the government actors can make mistakes. They're not perfectly informed about where to set the subsidy. Okay, now Here's the next part I want to talk about for government failure. It can be worse than that. It could be the government failure is not always such an innocent explanation. It could be other reasons. And one could be corruption. Okay. Suppose that there's some government bureaucrat setting the subsidy, or the legislator, whatever, and suppose that person knows the proper subsidy that would get us to efficiency. That person could be corrupt. So, for instance, suppose that person has a brother in law who's the superintendent of schools. So, hey, I want to help out my brother in law. If I can get the quantity of education really, really high, this makes my brother in law's salary even bigger. Okay. That would be one source of government failure. And on the other hand, you could think of corruption. What if the government bureaucrat just happened to be a person who didn't have any kids? And they'll say, well, this extra money for schooling doesn't help my family at all. He's not thinking about all the other families and might have pick a quantity too low or a subsidy too low. There's another case, corruption, just thinking about, if you're the government bureaucrat, you're supposed to be public minded, thinking about everyone, not just yourself and your own family. And so there would be a case where corruption caused you to have too little education. So so that's a second case where you could get a government failure because of corruption, and it's basically the government actors not having the right incentives. Okay, there's another case of this, and I want to explain this, and this is what's sometimes it's called partly the institutions of government, and partly just by the very nature of majority rule that we have. And this is sometimes called the problem of concentrated benefits, dispersed costs. Okay, so let me first give an example of this. Here's a very particular example. It's a little bit of math. I'm sorry, but this is only fourth grade math, so I want everyone to understand this. Okay, suppose that there is a country, state, whatever, that has 100 districts. Okay, each are the same size, each are the same in every way you can think of. Okay, and each one has one representative in its legislature or its parliament. Okay, so what that would mean is 51 is a majority. And suppose that they are ruled by majority rule, so if 51 agree on some policy, that's what gets passed. Okay, now suppose that it just happens that there's some way to build a bridge, and each district is considering there's only one possible bridge for each district, and each district is considering whether to build such a bridge. Okay, now in each district, the benefits of the bridge, let's say, are going to be $10 million, but the costs are $15 million. So in each district, the key is the costs are more than the benefits, so you would never want that bridge built. Okay, any economists say don't build it. Okay, now suppose though that in the legislature, that remember there's 100 legislators, suppose 51 of them get together and build a coalition, and they say, let's number them 1 to 51, and those first 51, they all get together, this kind of cabal, and says, hey, let's write a bill such that all of us get a bridge, but no one else does. Okay, if that happened, what would be the total costs? Okay, well, what would be the total benefits? Would just equal 51 times 10 million, so 510 million. And then what would be the total costs? It's going to be 15 times 51. Okay, let's do the math real quick. 5, 1, 2, 7, 765 million. Okay, 765 million. Okay. So here again, you'd say that bill should not be passed. This is not an efficient bill. The costs are higher than the benefits. Okay. Here is the problem with just about any country. What happens, the way these public works projects, these things like the bridge, like this, the way they are paid through the General Revenue Fund. And that is done by just taxing everyone in the country. Okay. So what that means, if that's the way things are funded, that's the way taxes are collected. And I said all these districts are the same. Let's assume they have the same number of people. Everyone has about the same income and average income across these districts. And so what that would mean is the total costs are going to be spent by the whole, raised from the whole country. And so how much would each district have to pay for this bill? Okay, this bill to build 51 new bridges. Well, the total cost for each district, total cost per district is equals 765 divided by 100. That equals 7.65 million. Okay. Meanwhile, the benefits are only 10 million. Okay, per district. So what happens if I'm in a district, one of these 51 that's in the coalition, I say, well, if we pass this bill, I get $10 million worth of benefits to my district. What's the cost to my district? Well, our taxes only go up 7.65 million. The benefits are higher than the cost for my district. I'm going to vote for it. Okay. The problem is all the 49 districts that aren't in this majority are going to end up with zero benefits, but they still have to pay 7.65 million. So they really hate this bill, but that doesn't matter. They don't get 2 votes for really hating it. They only get 1 vote for not liking it, for thinking on net it's not a good bill. So what happens is it passes 51-49, and this bill passes, and then all these 51 bridges are built, even though each project is not efficient. Each one, that the costs are greater than the benefits. Okay, so that's one case of what we call the concentrated benefits dispersed costs problem. Okay. The idea is that the benefits are concentrated in only 51 districts. Meanwhile, the costs are dispersed across the 100 districts. Okay. Now, so that's one example of it. But let me suggest that, and notice that we passed all these projects for which the benefits were only 2/3 the costs. Okay, for each case, for each one of these projects. Let me suggest I could make that ratio go even lower. I think in actual practice, I could get it down to 20% or something like that. I think there are really cases where government passed some projects where the benefits are only 1/5 the cost. Okay, think, why would anyone ever propose such a project? Well, the problem on top of what I've just explained is that often when the costs are low, so if you think about this, so an extra 7.65 million for one district in the U.S., a congressional district in the U.S. has 750 million people. So this is going to be less than $1. No, not 750,000. So it's going to be less than $1,000 per person. Much less. So something about $10 per person. That's all their taxes would go up in such a case. I would argue if this really happened in the U.S., few people would notice. Few taxpayers would notice. So what would happen is in those 49 districts where the taxpayers are having their taxes go up, they wouldn't even notice because the increase is so low. That makes this problem even worse. You could get this down to where the benefits are something like only 1 million or 2 million. and you could still pass it, and because often the taxpayers, even in the districts that get the the bridges, really wouldn't even notice that their taxes are going up. So this is a case where, again, the costs are dispersed. And I would say on top of that, they're kind of minimal. Um, so much that what happens is the people paying the costs often don't notice. Okay, so that's an additional factor on top of this problem just within the legislature that I described. Okay, so notice that those are three cases. We said, where might government failures come from? And I said, what, first cause, just mistakes. Okay. Number two, you could have it's because of corruption. And then a third case, and this is one thing that James Buchanan and lots of his followers, including me, have looked at institutional problems. So problems with the way we've set up government that could additionally cause these problems, or um, set up cases where we might expect government failure. Okay. Now, final topic. I want to for part A. You know what? I think, as I said we're going to do A, B, and C. You know what? I think we're going to do A, B, C, and D. So I'm going to split up A into two parts. So that's the end of part A. Okay. I'll do part B. I'm going to explain the prisoner's lemma. C and D, I'm going to explain problems from the back of the book. Okay. So see you in part B.